The predictions about the catastrophe that is the coronavirus get more ominous by the day. The World Health Organization says it poses a greater global threat than terrorism. That's bad enough. But what the expert you're about to meet says is even more terrifying. Professor Gabriel Leung believes 60% of the world's population could become infected with the virus, and that as many as 45 million of us might be killed by it. Now, it'd be easy to dismiss the professor as alarmist, except he's the man who led the fight against the SARS virus. He knows what he's talking about. We ignore him at our peril. It's not a matter of if, but when Australia's streets will look like this.
It doesn't appear that any country has been completely successful at 100% containment and driving it back into the wild.
This is life for the 7 million people of Hong Kong, caught in the crosshairs of the coronavirus.
It frightens me. But I think that a little bit of anxiety will give you that extra bit of motivation to take precautions.
A world where people only venture out in masks, where almost all public places are deserted for fear of infection, where businesses are deserted and economic markets are in panic. And this may only be the start.
There is now an emergency going on, and what we must do is very rigorous infection control.
This is the new normal of possibly the greatest pandemic the world has ever seen. If coronavirus is the disease X the world has been fearing, then it possibly began somewhere like this, among a colony of bats.
There's sleeping time bombs across the region right now.
And then somehow the virus almost certainly crossed over to humans at so-called wet markets. Professor Gabriel Leung is considered the world's foremost expert on coronavirus. Based in Hong Kong, he led the global fight against SARS.
It is certainly more effective. So, and it's also very difficult to try to control it.
And coronavirus, or COVID-19, as the illness is now being called, spreads far more rapidly than SARS. Unchecked, as countries like China and South Korea have discovered, the infection rate becomes exponential.
The big unknown now is really how big is the iceberg?
So you're guessing there could be many, many more people?
I don't know, but I'm suspecting that.
Coronavirus has already struck over 80 countries and counting. Professor Leung's prediction for the eventual extent of the pandemic is chilling. From everything you've learnt over the past weeks and months, what is your best estimate of how many people around the world could be affected by this virus?
Don't know. Everybody is susceptible. And if you assume that everybody randomly mix with each other, then eventually you will see 40, 50, 60% of the population get infected.
At current mortality rates, that level of infection would mean between 45 and 60 million deaths worldwide. And that's just in the first wave of the virus, despite the desperate, draconian lockdown measures being used in China.
Is the second wave worse than the first wave, do you think?
Don't know, but we have to prepare for that possibility that there is a second wave.
As a person and a scientist, does this virus frighten you?
Every time I'm involved in an epidemic, it frightens me.
As Australia now prepares to be hit by the first wave of coronavirus, it's worth looking at the effect it has had on infected cities like Hong Kong, so close to the epicentre of the outbreak.
I can tell you in all the years I've been coming here, this is not normal. This is one of Hong Kong's busiest market streets, and at this time of the day, it is always packed, jammed, teeming, shoulder to shoulder with tourists and shoppers. But this is a product of what public health officials call social distancing. If you don't have to be on the street, if you don't have a good reason, most of these people are going to the subway on either end, then simply stay home.
We are in uncharted territory.
One measure of China's influence is the pressure it has put on the World Health Organization to not officially call the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. But on that front, the man at the centre of it is blunt.
Why is there a blockage with that? Why was the WHO reluctant to call it a pandemic?
Well, technically it is. I suspect that it may be because colleagues may think that if they will use the word pandemic, then it would trigger panic. And panic is no good for any kind of outbreak control.
How was this virus born? What was the mechanism that gave birth to it?
Probably a zoonotic jump, that is from a small mammal, likely reared or captured at least for food consumption. The reservoir appears to be a bat.
You have the symptoms of coronavirus. Friends, family, or workmates may have already been infected. Whether you live or die depends on two things: how Australia's health authorities and hospitals cope with this pandemic, but mainly how old you are.
We would be particularly worried for frail elderly patients who became unwell with respiratory failure with this infection.
Associate Professor Chris McIsaac is Director of Intensive Care at Royal Melbourne Hospital. As coronavirus gathers force in Australia, he and his staff are on the highest alert level in modern history.
We have a 42-bed ICU. I think if we needed to provide intensive care for more than that number, it wouldn't be business as usual.
What do we know about the type of people who are being killed by this virus?
Age, overriding determinant, age.
Elderly.
Yes.
In Hong Kong, Professor Gabriel Leung is one of the global scientific leaders in the fight against coronavirus. He says if infected with the virus, people over 65 are 20 times more likely to die from it than those under 65.
Let's pray that we will not see a nursing home or retirement home facility having the same experience, because the outcomes could be absolutely dire.
Tragic news this morning. A 95-year-old woman who was living at the aged care facility here losing her life to coronavirus.
In Australia, the cases are coming. And as Professor Leung has already witnessed in other countries, the fear is what starts with a few cases quickly become hundreds. And then local epidemics soar into uncharted territory.
Now is the time to really pull out all the stops, put everything you got into it to fight it. We have to give it the whole of government approach, give it all you got, throw everything at it quick and early and hard. That will buy you sufficient time, and if you're extremely lucky, you might even be able to contain it.
If you're extremely lucky.
If you are extremely lucky. If you've got millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people who might actually be infected, I fear that this is going to bring about another massive instance of health inequity. Because this disease actually is only treatable if you've got ICU beds, if you've got ventilators, if you've got good drugs availability to tie the people over when they get really sick.
In other words, you're saying the people who will survive are only those who can afford it.
In health systems that can afford it.
Now to New York, where the governor has declared a state of emergency with now at least 89 coronavirus cases, a 50% jump overnight. The governor with strong words for the CDC. And tonight we're learning one of those infected in New York is an Uber driver. This as some professional sports teams are assessing how they move forward when it comes to fan participation. Here's ABC's Stephanie Ramos.
Tonight, a state of emergency declared in New York as the coronavirus spreads across the country. The number of confirmed cases soaring to at least 89 statewide. 11 in New York City, including an Uber driver, a man in his 30s, hospitalized in Queens. Plus, 23 new cases confirmed in a suburb outside New York City, about half of them linked to an attorney who frequently traveled through Grand Central Terminal.